All right, welcome back. We're going to be talking about elementary algebra today for our ACT school-wide learning. I'm Mrs. Bowman, and for elementary algebra, we're going to have 10 questions on the ACT over this topic. Now, the different types of questions that you might see for elementary algebra might be substitution, simplifying algebraic expressions, writing expressions and equations, solving linear equations, multiplying polynomials, and solving inequalities. So first, let's talk about substitution. Now, these are usually pretty simple questions on the ACT, but the way they're written, a lot of times we can make mistakes with order of operations or maybe some signs. So what they're going to do is they're going to give you an expression, maybe something like 5a plus 3 minus 3b plus 7, and then they're going to give you values for a and values for b that you're just going to substitute in. Once you do that, use your calculator, plug those numbers in, and see what you would get for that. Then we get to simplifying expressions. Now, substitution, a lot of times we're plugging the numbers in, but when we get to simplifying expressions, here we're going to take it and we're going to be trying to divide out anything that's common. So sometimes we're going to be looking at where we have a fraction and maybe something like 16xy over 24x squared. So the 16 and the 24, we want to simplify that like a fraction, finding a number that can go into both of those. So in this case, when we have 16 and 24, we can end up dividing those by the greatest common factor on it. Same thing with your variables. We want to pay attention to our exponent rules, kind of like we talked about last week when we simplify those variables. Now, when we factor an expression like x squared plus 4x minus 12, remember when you factor something like that, that's where you want to look at factors of negative 12 that add up to positive 4. So in this case, factors of negative 12 that add up to positive 4 are going to be positive 6 and negative 2. And that's why we get x plus 6 and x minus 2. And in the denominator in this case, you've got 5x minus 10. So you'd factor out that 5, and we get 5 times x minus 2. And then all we have to do is factor out that common term. Now, writing expressions and equations, in this case, we're going to be given words, and we're going to take and we're going to put it in terms of we've got words, and we're going to put it in terms of an algebraic expression, or put it in numbers and variables. So you really want to look at keywords in this case. So like if I have the word increased means we're going to add. If I have something like less than or decreased by, that's going to be an indicator that we need to do some subtraction. Now, product is going to be something that tells us that we want to multiply. Now, not on this list. We have also things like quotient. Quotient tells us we would divide. If something says that it's squared or cubed, that's going to be an indicator that we need to use an exponent. Now, if we're writing an equation, the keyword's going to be equals, or maybe 5 is the same as x plus 7. So is a keyword for something that can tell us it equals something. Now, the next one, solving inequalities. Now, inequalities and equations, we solve these very similarly, but inequalities can be a little bit trickier because we're not looking for just a single answer on an inequality. It's going to be saying that our answer is going to be bigger than this or maybe smaller than this. So it's going to be a whole range of numbers that can be our answer. Now, we have to remember that when we solve inequalities, that if we're dividing a negative number on both sides, we've got to flip that inequality sign. So, for example, when we have 7 minus 4x is greater than 27, we solve that exactly the same way. We subtract the 7, but when we come time to divide that negative 4, flip the inequality sign at the end. That would be an easy place to make a mistake. So just pay attention to that. All right, now when we multiply polynomials, we have a couple different things that we would look at. Maybe we're looking at taking one number and distributing to a whole other polynomial. For the first example, we're taking 3a and multiplying all terms in that trinomial by 3a. So we'll multiply our numbers together, and then we multiply our variables together. Now, when you multiply a times a squared, for example, don't forget your exponent rules. A times a squared will give you a cubed. Now, when you get to an example like 3x plus 2 times x plus 5, we're essentially just distributing twice. I'm going to take the 3x times the x and the 5, and then take the 2 times the x and the 5. Or maybe you've heard your algebra teacher talk about the FOIL method, where you multiply your first terms, your outer terms, your inner terms, and your last terms. And then the last thing you would do is combine any like terms that you might have. And then the last thing you might see on the elementary algebra part would be solving equations. I've got 3 different examples here for solving equations. Again, remember inverse operations. If I'm adding 2 to one side and I need to move it to the other side, I subtract it. If I'm multiplying 5 times x, to undo that 5 times x, I need to divide by 5. Same thing when we have fractions on the middle example. The first thing I would do is I would add the 4 to both sides, and then I'm essentially dividing by 2/3, but remember, dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 3/2 to get rid of that 2/3. And then the last example, if I have variables on both sides and numbers on both sides, we've got to get those like terms together. So I would start out and get my variables on one side by using those inverse operations again, and then get my numbers together and continue solving. Now remember, on the ACT, if you're solving an equation, you're going to have answer choices as well. So you can always take your answer choices and plug back in and make sure that the answer works that way. So that'll do it for elementary algebra for this week. Next week we'll be talking about intermediate algebra.